face, carry me away. Carry me away, lift me from this place, ease my burdens, Lord. Take me to your world, let me see your face, carry me away. Carry me away, lift me from this place, ease my burdens, Lord. Take me to your world, let me see your face, carry me away.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another SDAQ&A. I'm Peter Dixon, your host for today, and my very special guest is Elissa Milne. How are you, Elissa? Good to see you.
I'm pretty good. But look, we should start off with me making sure people know how to pronounce my name. And the reason that this is important is because
Good idea. I get
people
it
around
wrong
the
all
world
the
play
time.
my music. And so here's the thing. It's not Melissa without the M. It's Mona Lisa without the moan.
I've always felt that it was kind of not Elissa and not Elissa. It's somewhere in between the two.
Well, look, that would work. But it's just so long as it's kind of that E sound. We don't want to be Elissa, because that's like, I'm not Elissa Milne, but you know. Anyway.
And we've known each other since 1976, and I still get it a bit wrong, you know.
Oh, well, I just thought, you know, I get messages about this nearly daily from around the world, so we might as well just put
It's a
another
good
little
idea.
spot out there
Yeah.
going, this is how you say it. This is how it
It's
works.
like people with spelling Alicia. It can be Alicia, Elissa, Alicia, Elissa.
Exactly. We're very confusing. But look, it's the spelling you need if you are French or Spanish or Greek.
Mm.
Because if you only had the one S, it would be like Elisa.
Mm-hmm.
And we want the, you know, anyway. We're
Well-
not here for a discussion about linguistics.
Well, maybe we are.
Actually, we might have nailed it right from the get-go.
Hey, well, either way, it is great to have you. And one of the things we're going to chat about today is this kind of sense of the longevity of this issue of women's ordination. It's not just popped its head up because of this recent photo that we've seen. It's not just reared its head just since Antonio and the no vote. And in chatting to you briefly in the last week, you shared a story about when you were really quite young and you were aware of this. Can you share that again, where you were kind of challenging your, was it the pastor or the youth guy? And
Look, I mean, probably by the time I was 9, everybody at my primary school, like I'm talking my classmates, everybody knew that I wasn't going to take this nonsense of girls do this and boys do that. And I'm going to give a little bit more context here. The year before the incident I shared with you, which I will come to, the school decided they were going to have a full day where we're all going to play cricket. It was going to be a cricket match. So we all turn up. This is the Adventist primary school in 1978. And we all turn up and the teams are selected from the boys and the girls are told to go and sit down. Whole day. We were expected to watch the boys play because that's how it works in society. I wasn't having a bar of that. So I organized a protest and all the female teachers joined in.
That's fantastic.
So the next
Wow.
year is when the things were happening that I was telling you about, where the local minister would turn up for his weekly, advice giving session with the primary school students. Lovely idea, but this poor man was walking into, just yeah, it was a tough thing he was walking into every week because the kids were always dreaming up questions that they knew that I could back up on.
And this is still 9 and 10-year-old kids.
This would be in Australian terms, this would be year 6 and year 7 kids. So, 11, 12, 13, maybe 13. I don't know. I was 11, and and the question come up about why can't women be ordained? And the poor guy, like, it'd be a different minister, different weeks. Like, they all took turns for this ordeal, and they'd kind of fumble around with this, that, and the other, and it's in the Bible, and then everyone would be like, oh, well, where in the Bible? And so they'd kind of be trying to bring out all of the verses. But my favorite of all was when the minister said, well, look, men have to be ordained and not women because Adam was created before Eve. So we're like, okay. And I go, so using that logic, why don't we ordain giraffes? And he had no answer. So,
What I love about that story is your sense of humor, which I knew you around this era, and even when you were younger,
yeah.
you always had a sense of humor, but you always had a real sense of what justice was and what it meant,
Oh,
and you
yeah.
spoke up about it. And the third thing it brings to mind is this, we're talking about the late 70s, are we? So
Yeah.
this has
That's
been
79.
ongoing for a long, long time.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
And I'm sure I wasn't the only human. I mean, like, obviously I was talking about it from the time I was, 9, 10, 11, to the point where everybody knew that if they raised the topic, I would win the debate. Like, they knew that they were on a winner if they raised this topic, because there'd be sparks, and then I would always get the last word, because you just can't support it.
Exactly.
And you just can't support it in a fair world, or in
Yeah.
a reasonable world, or in a loving, like, in any world where you're not a fascist, you can't support it.
Yeah, you cannot support discrimination, especially organized discrimination.
Yeah.
The other day, I mentioned, I think in Rochelle, the interview I had with Rochelle, that in some ways I saw a parallel between race discrimination and gender discrimination. And someone wrote to me and said that what I'd said was appalling, because race discrimination is way worse than gender discrimination. And I said, I didn't know there was like a gradient. I just see discrimination, let's speak against it. Why do you
Yeah.
think such a reaction? It was from a woman as well.
Look, intersectionality is a real thing, and it's really fair to say that white women have spoken up for women's rights in a way that has completely sort of papered over the very important fights for justice that really should be fought on the basis of race, or on the basis of disability, or on there are a lot of different ways in which people are discriminated against. And any sense of, oh, we've solved all the problems of the world because women have the vote, well, we know that that's not true. And, oh, we've solved all the problems of the world because now everybody can vote, no matter what color of your skin. And it's like, well, no, that doesn't solve the problems either. Like, each little step towards justice doesn't actually get us there yet, as long as there is other injustice going on. So, I think if the injustice that is really in your face and really causing you a lot of identity challenge at the time, it can seem trite for people to be arguing for something that's not your fight, or that's low on your agenda. Like, we all are kind of narcissists, and we all want to fight for the things that make a difference for us. So, and I think having some empathy for that very human narcissism is okay. Like, yes, different people want to fight for different things. I mean, an example, at the moment, we've got, 2 million, 3 million refugees, whatever it is, in Ukraine, heading to all of the surrounding countries. At the same time, we've got, is it 1 million people that have been affected by the floods in southeast Queensland, far north New South, north New South Wales? We've got people who've lost their homes and everything in Lismore, exactly the same way that we've got people who are refugees in from Ukraine who've lost everything. Now, how do you weigh those two things up? How do you go, oh, we should really prioritize this rather than that? Well, you can't. Both things are important. And I think that doesn't mean that we don't talk about either. It means that we recognize when somebody's talking about the refugee situation from Ukraine, we go, yeah, that's important. And then we talk about how important it is to care for people affected by the floods. They're both important. And talking about one doesn't negate the importance of the other.
And I think too that sometimes people say to me, well, why are you speaking up? It's inconsequential. You should focus on the positives or Jesus. Whereas I think, well, you can speak into the floods, you can speak about support of the Ukraine, you can go along and sing positive songs. We are capable of doing things simultaneously.
Well, we are capable of doing things simultaneously, but the purpose in somebody saying that isn't to do things simultaneously. The purpose of someone saying that is to shut you down.
Yeah.
It's to shut you down from fixing the thing that needs fixing. It's like, stop trying to fix things. That's really that message. Like, but what about this? What about that? Are you saying we shouldn't fix this? Answer, yes, that's what I'm saying. Well, okay, own it. It's not, you're not virtuous when you say we shouldn't try and fix things. And the assumption that there's some sort of spiritual value in accepting all the garbage in our world, like in accepting that people are dying of starvation, and the systemic ways in which we disenfranchise people, that we make it harder for them to live a healthy life. That it's not okay. It's not okay. We can never do enough, and that means we can't address everything. But to just say, oh, we need to focus on spiritual matters, well, that's the essence of evil in my book.
Yeah, I agree. Well said. This person that said I was appalling, her husband said, well, the Bible clearly speaks to, and then he went on to talk about the hierarchy of God, to man, to woman, and I said, well, maybe Paul was speaking in context, and he replied that the Bible has no context. It is for all time.
Contextless.
And I
Wow.
thought, maybe
Wow.
not. The flat earth theory sort of stems from, or is exhibited in the Bible.
Look, yeah, and
What are your thoughts
also,
on that reply?
well, my thoughts on that reply are that if you read Genesis 2, I'm going into dangerous. Peter, I knew if I came on here, I was going to say things that would then be, look, hello,
Misconstrued
everybody.
and taken out of context.
Well, no, this is actually saying, okay, let's look at Genesis 2 in the context of Genesis 2. And everybody who's watching now, hold on, because you've probably never really read Genesis 2. In Genesis 2, it says that God made Adam all by himself, and Adam was lonely. So God was like, gosh, how can we fix this? We've got to sort this out. And did God immediately make Eve? Answer, no, he did not. God's first thought was, hey, Adam, let's take a look around all the creatures I've already made and see if somebody here is who you might want to mate with. So I'm just saying, Genesis
I didn't
2,
realize that.
I told you, you haven't read Genesis 2 properly. And so if we're going to actually read things just the way that they flow in the Bible without context, we are going to be supporting a whole bunch of crazy stuff. Because I don't think anybody in their right mind genuinely wants to be going around saying that God thought it was a great idea for Adam to hook up with an elephant. I just don't think that's the case. But if you read Genesis 2, it kind of looks like it.
Wow, that is it. Yeah, I like
Kind
the
of
new
looks like it.
things that you're bringing
Yeah,
to the
and
table.
nobody talks about this. It is the
Mm.
elephant in the room.
When you spoke about your being, the young you speaking up in protest, and that the sports story that you shared, where
Yeah.
you kind of literally did protest and formed a group of people to support that and make a stand. Why do you think those that have watched this loop endlessly for decades, and who also, I'd point out, do great things and are involved in wonderful ways? I'm not suggesting that there aren't women,
Yeah.
pouring into every aspect of Adventist life or ministry or whatever. But why do you think there isn't an organized protest, which was obviously a successful thing for you to do at age 9 or whenever,
Well,
and around the world,
define
whenever there is
success.
protest like that, it works. Well,
Define success. I mean,
success is as in a bit of a tipping point towards positive change.
because the fact of the matter is, that day that the cricket was going on, we protested, but the cricket game continued and we never got to play.
Right.
Like, we succeeded in having a protest. And I think it's a long game. It's a really long game. And it's longer than our lifetimes. And that's exhausting. It's really exhausting. And
Mm,
so, um, why is there not more protest? It's because people actually have lives to live. People have
mm,
got the dishes to do. And, women in particular have got, they often pick up a lot of this really tedious stuff that just keeps the wheels turning.
mm,
And, you know, you're actually risking your identity, you're risking your community. And do you really want to do that? Especially if you've got family who are in the community and you're creating a ruckus. There are all kinds of social
mm.
costs that come with pursuing justice. And that's true inside the church, out, like, that's not a church thing.
No.
That's just the reality of making change in the world. It's exhausting.
Mm, mm. D does Yeah, and I don't want to imply that people in the Adventist church aren't doing enough. I definitely am not implying that. But when we saw the picture recently, the picture of the 23 men that in
Hmm,
many ways kind of led to this discussion, my discussion with Rochelle and others that are coming in future, if that kind of thing continues to raise its head, are you saying that because have got all these other responsibilities and because of fear of losing identity and all the other things you
yeah,
just mentioned,
yeah.
does it mean that this is just another little point and that leads us slowly in the direction of change? Or are there tipping points we should kind of address more vigorously?
I I think I think that the tipping point has come and gone,
Mm,
personally, like my
mm,
personal view. And I completely understand other people going, "Pff, I don't want to buy into that theory of this
mm,
because that then challenges my identity and my community," right? So all of us are finding the position that we take based on what makes us able to go forward in the day. For me, having observed this since the late 1970s, and compare, like, let's just go back to the 70s. In the 70s, when I was, mounting these arguments as a 10-year-old, women had only just um, legally been entitled to equal pay. When my mother was a young woman, she was literally paid half the wages of a man doing the same job on the basis of her genital, manifestation in her human body.
mm,
That's why she was paid less. And the people who had different genitals got paid double the amount. And that was it. She was doing the same job as the other person, probably maybe better even, and it didn't make any difference. It wasn't about that. So by the time I come along, a 10-year-old, I didn't realize at the time, but in Australia and New Zealand, the whole women being legally entitled to equal pay was only a few years earlier.
mm,
Like,
mm,
it wasn't like, oh, it's been 100 years of men and women having equal pay. Why
mm,
do we still have this problem in the church? It
mm,
was all still being highly contested in society. So contesting it in the church just seemed like, all of society is dealing with this tricky matter of how do we transition from a highly racist, highly sexist, just basically how do we migrate ourselves from this disgraceful situation to something that we can actually be proud of. And so fighting about that, arguing about that, protesting about that in the church was just part of this whole general cultural thing. But we're 50 years, we're now in the 2020s, and we've had, female prime ministers and presidents, and, women are CEOs of corporations, and, all of these things are now culturally normal, maybe not equal in terms of numbers, but, it's not like, oh goodness, that's not going to work. We all know it works.
Mm.
So for the church to still be in this position of maintaining that 1950s kind of conception of how it works, it's just so out of step with reality these days that you have to ask, look, is there something inside the narratives that make the church make sense that mean it's just never going to happen? Because wouldn't it have happened already if it was going to happen? It's like a relationship, it's, you're dating somebody for 10 years and one or the other says, hey, should we get married? And they go, oh, I don't know, let's just see how it goes. So you go on for another 10 years, like, maybe we should get married and think about having kids. It's like, oh, well, let's just see how it goes. And the years go on. Well, not having an answer is the answer. Like, that's the answer. If it hasn't been resolved, it's been resolved. And it's been resolved to say women can't participate in this. This is not for you, ladies.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, just referring again to the 70s and the change in equal pay within Adventism only came about because Mary Kay McLeod took the church to court, and they settled out of court and changed the whole structure. So come 1978, there was a closer balance of, there was a less of a gender wage gap. So that kind of indicates that protest does work, but that
not,
there is but generally speaking, we're looking at many different things that need to be leveled up. And so how effective is it in light of the big picture?
Yeah. Well, I just feel in the 70s, it felt like, and again, this is the perspective of a 9-10-year-old, right? In the 70s, it's like they just didn't realize that this is possible. They just didn't realize that it's not the only way to see things. They just didn't realize that women are completely capable of all of the different, tasks. And also, they just didn't realize that God's okay with it. They just didn't realize. We're not there anymore. They totally realize what is going on with this, and the administration, choose to continue down this path. They actively choose. Look at the sessions that occur in church governance where the issue is raised, and I mean, it's always on the agenda and it's always getting turned down. And look, I look at society today. Who are the groups of people who want to keep women out of leadership? Well, it's a really narrowing group that take that view these days. And basically, it's religions and fascists. That's it.
Yeah.
Religions and fascists. So if you want to align yourself with religion and fascism, that's the direction you go. If you think, you know what, aligning myself with fascism doesn't actually feel very good to me, maybe take a look at the ways in which your choices align yourself with white supremacists, with Nazis, with people who basically want to control people based on their race, religion, eye color, whatever. Like, just look at who you're aligning yourself with and say, is this actually how I want to present myself to the world. And it
Mm.
staggers me. It staggers me that the Adventist Church looks at this whole cultural milieu and goes, yeah, that's who we want to be with. That's who we want to hang with. It's staggering.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd be interested in your thoughts on why the suppressed not only go along with it, but often defend the oppressor.
Yeah.
There's a syndrome for that, isn't it? That they've.
Well, I think it's called Stockholm Syndrome. I think that's what that one's called. Um, yeah, it's about identity, and it's about feeling safe, and it's about feeling afraid, and it's about how can I be myself if I'm not who I am right now? What
Mm,
what is the path from here to there? I can't see
mm,
a path from here to there. So the only thing that keeps my world safe is to maintain the world I've already got.
mm,
Um, it's not about the fundamentals of it are about I don't know who I would be if I don't align myself with this. I don't know who I would be, and that's
mm,
terrifying. And
mm,
that can be bigger than just the personal, like that's putting it in the seed of the matter, like who would I be? But if you're also employed by the church, it's not just who would I be, it's who would my whole family be?
mm,
How would we be? How would I feed my children?
mm,
How like who would we even talk to? Who would my friends be? Like it's a huge thing. So
mm,
when we ask, there are some people where if we ask them to protest, if we ask them to oppose themselves to this injustice, we're asking something that's actually just too big because
yeah,
we're asking them to tear their lives apart. And I don't think that's fair. Like,
yeah,
you know, from from the position of someone like the reason I can happily sit here and say these things that sound extreme, like I'm literally saying that it's fascists who
mm,
choose to leave women out of leadership and that's who the church is aligning with. That's a really strong but true thing to say.
mm,
But I couldn't say that if I felt that my whole social world was going to crumble because all of my friends were going to go, "Oh, you said this
mm,
shocking thing." I mean, I can say it because my identity in 2022 doesn't rest on whether people are shocked by that or not.
mm,
But if I were in a situation where everybody who's important to me might might turn their back might turn their back on me or really question um,
mm,
i- the worthiness of my participating in my own community, I would very rightly consider my words with great care
mm,
and
mm,
and see a bigger picture that, well, maybe in the scheme of things women being ordained isn't the hill I want to die on.
mm, mm.
Maybe I want to protect my family, maybe I want to protect my children, like there's all kinds of reasons.
Yeah, yeah. When you've looked at, and I'm sure you have, the build up to women getting the vote, was the first country New Zealand?
Yeah.
Um,
And South Australia as a state was they're both around about the same time.
right. So as you have explored and analysed that situation, the time it took from when the rumblings of discontent began to actually the vote being allowed,
Mm.
did you notice this from a sociological perspective, the fear that women would have had to speak up, that in fact it was as bad as you say, equivalent to a fascist kind of regime.
Mm.
Um, but at what point did people go, well, look, it's actually too much to ask for people to step up and say something and to really put their identity on the line? That had to have happened for the success of the vote to
Well, look,
pass. So at what point do people have to put aside their concerns of identity and safety and community, etc.?
well, you see,
And
now you're actually talking genuine strategy. Like now we're not, to be honest, the question that you're really asking is how do you make that change actually happen?
mm,
Like we can know that it's right. We can know that it comes at a great personal cost to argue for it and to, agitate for it. What are the magic ingredients that allows the culture to go, you know what, it's not acceptable anymore. Because those moments arrive where people go, you know what, it's not okay to have slaves anymore. It's not okay to, whatever the thing might be. Like
Mm.
society, as societies around the world change because they reach a point where it's not okay anymore. Now, in many countries, the push to have women vote was driven in large part by the temperance movement. So women who maybe didn't want the vote for feminist reasons of going women are equal to men, women were able to be persuaded to come on board the fight because the argument was as long as women don't have the vote, all of the men folk are going to be drunk and disorderly and our children will go hungry. So we need women to have the vote so that we can have prohibition. And
Mm.
that was a really big part of women going, yeah, the purpose of this isn't actually justice. The purpose of this is I've got a real problem that impacts on the safety of my family, and having the vote will help me have a safer domestic life. That was huge. Like the people that we hear about with suffrage are often the upper class women who behaved in rowdy and impolite ways and used curse words and, made spectacles of themselves upon the street and even got themselves killed, in the fight for suffrage. But in a lot of, and it's different in each community, in each country, but one thing that's common around a lot of different countries is this inclusion of women in the suffrage movement because they wanted to restrict access to alcohol because of the impact it was having on families. So actually hooking a justice issue to a practical, this will change your life in a practical way that that's important, that actually will save lives, your life potentially. If you're a woman who's suffering domestic abuse because your husband's coming home drunk every day, you're going to get on board that.
Mm.
If you've got any energy left in you, you'll get on board that because it's actually impacting on your safety. But with this women's ordination issue, it doesn't kind of have that urgency. It's like, is anyone going to die if women don't get, recognized as ordained ministers?
Mm.
I, I I think that's the difference between the push for suffrage and the push for women's ordination. People don't see it as actually impacting on their ability to get through the day.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, some interesting thoughts there. Can you can you
It's like, I
uh,
just give you a chapter of a sociological text.
can you share your thoughts on false hope? Like, I remember listening to my mother, women chatting about wage and ordination, and again back in the 70s,
Mm,
and there was an air of optimism, and I
yeah,
would hear conversations between men in the church to these women, and there was a sense of, hey, things are changing, and
yeah.
but I've always felt like those who were saying that knew that it was going to be a bit further along than the women they were talking to may have
Oh,
thought. So during the late 70s, the 80s, the 90s, right up to the early 2000s, I sensed there was this kind of optimism that, and particularly during Jan Paulsen's
right.
presidency.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but but I feel like, was there false hope being offered? Because even Jan Paulsen would take things slowly moving forward. And
yeah. Well,
I think if we're looking at a time of opportunity, that was it. If we're thinking that the tipping point has opportunity has come and gone, I think that was it. And by the time
yeah,
Ted Wilson came into power, I think it's almost all over.
gone. Well, look, retrospectively, at the time I thought this also, to be honest, which was, um, like I was only 12 or 13, but that thought has proven to be really spot on, that the whole thing very much more hinged on the outcome of Glacier View than, like, that was a cultural decision about far more than a single doctrine or a single human, or you know it was a question of who do we want to be moving forward. Now, I'm going to take a step back and say, well, what was Adventism prior to Glacier View? And the Adventism I grew up in and the Adventism my parents grew up in was an Adventism that looked after everybody in the community. It was, like when I think about my childhood in the 70s, we had, you and I lived for a while at the same, right next door to each other
Next
at
door
Longbourn
neighbours.
College,
Yeah.
and so there's the college down the road where everyone could go to school. There was the factory across the road where people could get a job. And there were all kinds of jobs that were available inside the Adventist system. People could grow up going, I want to be a nurse, and they could go to the SAN, and they could go to Avondale, and just there were things that you could do with all, you could stay part of the community and there was a place for you. And if you really weren't that academic and all the rest of it, you could always get a job in the sanitarium factory, right? Like you could be packing Weet-Bix and it was a job and you had a place in the community, you belonged. And there would be times when there'd be people with disability, people would find a way to look after them inside the community. Like it was just like this kind of social security blanket for the whole community. People would look after each other. It was very much a socialist experiment in actual fact, the way that, we would all contribute our tithes. The tithes would, of course, support the wages of the ministers and all the rest of it. But at the end of the day, the church actually did have discretionary funds that could be used to help people in trouble and keep the community together. And everybody was good with that. Everybody liked that. And then in the 80s, and then you've got the whole kerfuffle with Glacier View. And subsequent to that, you have church organizations selling off assets. So you see the Auckland Adventist Hospital getting sold off. You see, I mean, my goodness, what a great example at the moment, the Wahroonga estate, this whole beautiful parcel of land that Ellen White, the narrative goes that, it's kind of vision from God. This is what this is going to be. And all of her ideas about education being in nature and all of this. Well, we've got a school that's a high rise. There's no grounds for the kids to play on. And they're planning on building, high-rise apartment buildings there for money, not for the benefit of the community. I mean, we're talking an entire cultural, philosophical shift away from caring for each other to kind of greed is good. And I think it's not just women's ordination. Like
No.
women's ordination is like, it would be weird. It'd be weird if all of these other things were going on and women were also getting recognized as ordained ministers, because it wouldn't make philosophical sense. It all belongs together. Like all of these changes and shifts in the way that Adventism is organized and operates in the world go together. The only bit of Adventism that is kind of this outlier is Adra. Adra's this like extraordinary organization that does phenomenal practical good in the world, and it really doesn't fit in with the philosophy of Adventism anymore.
And maybe
So
even
that's
sanitarium too. They're a world unto their own in many ways. Like,
well, look, I
I'm
don't.
sure they wouldn't stop a woman being CEO of sanitarium if the opportunity was there.
Well, you don't know. You don't know. I don't know. But the fact of the matter is, sanitarium certainly got outside consultants, and sanitarium was always a place where people could get a job, like I said. And then in the 80s, 90s, it all sort of corporatized a whole lot more. I mean, you've still got Adventists, running the show, but outside people were kind of being brought in on the idea that, we're going to improve it if it's no longer Adventist run entirely, et cetera. And there are interesting arguments with that. And I don't mean that that's the wrong decision, but it's a different approach. It's a change in philosophy, and it's no longer essentially about the community and serving the community. And look, sanitarium's got to live in the real economic world. And so we've seen product line after product line being sold off from sanitarium. I don't know about everybody else who's watching this, but there are all kinds of fantastic products sanitarium made, which I can't get anymore. And it's whereas once upon a time, sanitarium was genuinely seen as a ministry, um, it is necessarily acting as a corporation these days. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but it's not what it was. Like
Yeah.
it's a different philosophical thing than it was.
Mm. Hey, a quick plug for Adra. They in Cooranbong in the Morisset estate over there. They've got a massive building, massive, and they've got every kind of secondhand, from DVDs, CDs, clothing, toys, books, you name it. It is in this shed. And I was talking to one of the leaders there, and he was saying, we're not worried about the money. We're worried
Yeah,
about we want to serve the community.
yeah,
And I just loved that. It was like it's
yeah,
very refreshing.
yeah,
Just another little aside there. If the Commonwealth Bank, if it became apparent that a woman wasn't allowed to be the CEO of the Commonwealth Bank, surely there'd be litigation,
yeah,
because of its standing as a
yeah.
corporation. The Adventist Church, the SPD, is actually set up since the early 90s as a corporation, as a corporate body, isn't it? It's a PTY Ltd.
Um,
Wouldn't that mean that it could possibly be open to litigation on this subject, because it's not officially a church movement; it's a corporation?
well, look, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge this is the first time I've been consulted as a legal expert, and and a disclaimer that while I might happily pontificate about all kinds of things that I'm not actually professionally qualified to discuss, I don't know that I'm the person to be asking that of if you actually
Mm,
want an accurate answer. But in terms of the philosophy of it, like, hey, why don't we litigate this? The pretty upfront thing that comes to mind is that we have a system at the moment that says religion is exempt from law a lot of the time. Um, and yeah, it'd be interesting to see a test case, but you'd need deep pockets and like, is that what you want to spend your money on? And maybe for somebody it is what they want to spend their money on. And then it comes back to that whole issue of, floods, refugees, like, is that
mm,
what you want to spend your money on? And
mm.
triaging, these different things. But um, but I'm pretty confident that at the current state of Australian governance, there's a lot of political will to support um, religions being exempt from being decent.
Yes, yeah. I want to dive back to perhaps the reason we are having this conversation, and that's that picture of 23 men that was posted the other
Yeah,
day. And it's not about the picture; it's not criticizing the men in the picture necessarily. Um, but what were your thoughts when you saw that photo? What kind of re-emerged in your field of passion?
I've got to say, I didn't think anything. I didn't think a thing. It didn't seem strange to me. It didn't seem weird. It didn't seem unusual because I know that the Adventist church is a place that doesn't want women in leadership. So it seemed really nothing to see here. Everything's the same. What
Mm,
was interesting to me was the response from people. And I was like, wow, wow, that's different. That's a change. And I think it's a change because social media allows people to connect with other people who are outraged by the same things. So whereas, I mean, look, my favorite thing in church used to be if it was a great sermon, great, yay, we're winning. If it's not such a great sermon and you're just like, I've got to make it through to lunchtime, there was always the record. And you'd read through the record. Now the record was great because there would always be something to get outraged about in the record. There'd be this bit of news and that would be lovely and like, oh, that's
mm,
great. But there'd always be someone saying some ridiculous thing that you could get outraged about. But what do you do with that little flurry of like, oh, this is ridiculous, this is outrageous? Well, you're only sitting beside two people either side of you, and you're going to interrupt them in the middle of the sermon.
mm,
At the end of church, when you're chatting about things, you're probably not going to be able to impact on more than one or two people in a similar way, going, oh, I just read this thing in the record. And it's a bit socially weird to do in any
Mm,
case. Like, that's
mm,
probably not going to happen. Go to somebody's place for Sabbath lunch. Maybe after lunch, go, oh, I saw this thing in the again, it's not going to be
mm,
many people. It's all going to kind of temper down. And then, sunset comes, you go and do whatever your church social is, and, you move on. In
mm,
social media, you can see everybody come up in a great flurry of like,
mm,
guys, literally guys, like, what's going on?
mm,
And and you feel reinforced going, yeah, that's how I feel too. It's outrageous. Yeah, that's how I feel too. It's outrageous. And then you start feeling good feelings of like, wow, 50 of us feel this way. We can make a change. Like, it starts to spark
mm,
different kinds of
mm,
feelings.
mm,
So that was interesting to me. But the photo, nothing to see
mm,
here. This is business as usual.
mm. For the women who were angered by that, and particularly because they saw it as business as usual,
Mm.
um, can you empathize with their anger? I noticed in lots of the comments you were making, you were really excellent at. I described to someone that you were almost like a surgeon. You just surgically go in, assess the situation, and decimate the person that was kind of being critical of you.
Well, well, that's a kind of a rhetorical thing. I mean, that's a study of language and, you know, human nature and stuff. But yes, it's something it's something that's outrageous. It is something that is outrageous. I'm I don't expect anything, like, my expectation of the church is that. So my expectations were fulfilled when I
Yeah.
saw that photo. If somebody else's expectations are something different, they're going to
Mm,
feel something. They're going to feel something different. Um, I certainly felt. Um, Look, it's always the same arguments, so it's not even shock. Like, I'm
mm,
over the age of 50 now, so these things are not so shocking. It's like, this is how it has always been, decade upon
mm,
decade. People turn up and, I mean, all of the things like, oh, women bleed, so that's really, you can't have a bleeding minister. It's like, okay, or PMS is real, blah, blah, blah. I mean, leaving aside all of the craziness of that, there's a thing called menopause, right? So this argument only applies to women for this period of their life when they're likely to be having babies, and then there's the whole rest of their lives as well. That's just one little bundle of just nonsense. There's just nonsense after nonsense. And um, you know I'm going to deviate a little bit from the question you asked, because I just want to acknowledge something that's really important and doesn't get spoken enough about. Maybe when you and I here in Australia are sitting here going, this is outrageous, it's injustice. A lot of the push to prevent women from being ordained comes from countries and cultures where women do not share the kind of equality that we have in Australia. And I say the kind of equality. It's not complete, but the expectations of how men and women are supposed to interact aren't really being pushed by what people see in the Bible so much as by what people see in their culture. And it's challenging to say what my religion is going to impose a Western, um, corrupt, like all of those ideas that people have about Western culture as being corrupting and decadent, and all of that narrative gets into play. So it's complicated for a global church to take an approach that is supposedly authoritative and based on
mm,
what God wants. Because if you're saying this is what God wants, you're implicitly challenging the identity of people in all kinds of cultures, with all kinds of repercussions that you cannot foresee. So I just want to pop that little envelope of stuff,
yeah.
and like, it's a big thing.
Can I just
Um,
say something to that as well
yeah,
before you move on? The
yeah,
the no vote at Antonio in 2015 wasn't should the church have women's ordination, yes or no. It was should the unions and divisions be able to choose yes or no based on their
yeah,
local culture.
Yeah.
wouldn't have that and Ellen White set up the unions for that very potential hazard. Wouldn't it have been a good idea for the church to go down that path to say, look, yep, in SPD, if you choose to go ahead with it, you can, and that would then
Yeah.
honor all the
Yeah.
different what complexities about the global church set it apart
Well,
to
this,
have to be
in,
globalized.
in my opinion, I think there's a really good reason for an organization, a church organization, to refuse to give unions and conferences that freedom, because you're going down a slippery slope. And it's not a rhetorically dishonest thing to say that it's a slip. Like, often the slippery slope argument is rhetorically dishonest and intellectually dishonest, but I don't actually think that it's it's dishonest to say that it is a slippery slope. Once you get unions permitted to take a different approach to things, capital T things, what about if they decide they're going to take a different doctrinal position? And this kind of is a doctrinal position. If you truly believe that women, um, that this is an important element of religion to not permit women to be leaders in the church. If you say, well, they can do it, you don't have to do it, but they can do it. Well, what if they then say, you know what, we think Sabbath keeping should look like this?
Mm.
So people over there are going, well, that's heresy. What you're doing with your Sabbath keeping is heresy. And then what if they go, we think that the issues to do with temperance should actually look like this. It's like, well, that's heresy too.
Mm.
Once you start allowing an organization to have that degree of diversity, you are actually sowing the seeds for trouble, doctrinal trouble down the track. So it makes complete sense to me from a logical, organizational point of view. But compare it to McDonald's. Okay, McDonald's has the same food everywhere around the world, and that was the go for a long, 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 long time. And then one day they realized they could make more money if they allowed for local difference to inform their menu. For a long time, it was the same menu everywhere. But these days, you think of the ways, I mean, I don't mean to suggest that all of our viewers today are, heavy users of McDonald's, heaven forbid. But, you think about the way that Australian McDonald's is different to other McDonald's. I mean, they had the whole thing where it's like, they realized no one was coming into McDonald's for their coffee, because who would in Australia? Or why would you go to McDonald's for coffee? It just makes no sense. So they went with a kind of, oh, we do barista coffee here. Like, our coffee is just as good, because otherwise no one was ever going to come and get their coffee. Things like doing special, Australian burgers and, on all the rest of it, because they want people to feel we are part of your community. We serve you. So they've now got these regional differences. I've not made a study of traveling around the world visiting McDonald's, but I know this was a really big corporate shift for McDonald's. And the reason they did it is because they wanted to stay relevant in all of the markets that they were participating in. Now, it's exactly the same thing for Adventism. Where are you, you've got your set menu. How much are you prepared to allow for local difference to stay relevant, to stay part of the market? And when McDonald's also had the issue of everybody going, well, I'm not going to eat that food, it's not very healthy. So they brought in a whole salad range. They adapted, going, people don't want what we were selling. They don't want it was great while it lasted, but they don't want what we're selling anymore. Bring that to religion though, and then you've got people going, well, we're not motivated by what people want. We're motivated by what's true and what God has told us. And now you've got this tension going, well, actually, God never told you that. And people circling back going, well, I'm going to find a way to prove that God did tell me that, because I know it's true. And if I look hard enough, I'll find support in the Bible for it. And we know that we can find support in the Bible for pretty much, the slavery situation in North America, in the the Civil War, there were people on both sides using the Bible to argue their case. Like, you can use the Bible to argue for really pretty much anything. So the Bible's not a reliable source. Like, that's the lesson here. The Bible is not a reliable source for your argument, because the people on the opposing team are also using the Bible to support them. So you're not going to make progress.
Mm.
You need a different authority, and that's heresy. Like, I knew I was going to come on here, Peter, and just say heresy after heresy, but just pragmatically, if both
Yeah,
teams are using the Bible to say that they're right, you're not going to resolve it
yeah.
without reference to another authority.
I
Just
like what
logic.
I like what you're saying, because you're being very pragmatic about it. Can I address something along those lines of pragmatism? And do you mind me asking? I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Yeah, that's okay.
Are you still a Seventh Day Adventist?
I am, but that's because I didn't take my name off the roll.
Mm.
Like, everybody who's not taken their name off the roll is officially a Seventh Day Adventist. Here's the thing. This is my culture. This is my ethnicity, shall we say. This is my home, and it's my identity, in that sense of it informed everything about everything in my childhood. Like, everything.
Mm.
Like, the things
Mm.
I did and I didn't do were all informed by that. I mean, I grew up on that Longbourn College campus,
Mm.
surrounded by the students and the whole life. It's a very intense, growing up on a campus, as you know, it's a very intense expression of the culture.
Mm.
Um, I think a bit about Bob Ellis,
Mm.
Australian writer, famously created the
W-
Nostradamus Kid movie that,
Wonderful
you know,
movie.
explores what it's like to go to camp meeting, and just perfectly captured what camp meeting felt like in that period, which was a little bit earlier than me, but I still was going to camp meeting with the exact same tents and the whole thing. He was always on the outside of the Adventist culture because he had one parent who was an Adventist and one parent who wasn't. So his experience, and anybody whose parents don't work for the church has got a different experience again. But you know what it's like to be raised so much on the inside. Like, it's everything.
Mm.
So, I never felt the need to, like, I didn't, you know, it wasn't a meaningful thing for me to do, to take
Mm.
it off.
It's interesting for me, immersed and marinated. I was a fifth generation Adventist,
Mm.
but I think back to that Longburn era, and rock and roll kind of saved me because I discovered Deep Purple, Black Sabbath, Status Quo, AC/DC, and I
Such a
emerged.
rebel.
I found myself merging into a community that's global, and it's kind
Yeah,
of musicians nation, or music lovers
yeah,
nation,
yeah,
and that became my subculture more, in fact, as I look back, than I realized at the time, and
yeah,
saved me from perhaps feeling that I didn't have any support if I left.
yeah,
A lot of the
yeah.
musician friends I have that are within Adventism and outside of Adventism are way more open-minded, always have been.
Well,
Lead singer in one of my early bands in the early '80s, Adventist and gay, and yeah, it
yeah,
was a bit secret, but we
because
all knew.
yeah. Well, I mean, I actually don't know how you can be a musician and be, oh, I don't know. Like, church musicians see a lot of unvarnished truth, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like, and I'm gonna go off topic here for a moment to share an anecdote that to me sums up the kind of unvarnished truth that musicians get to see.
Mm,
So we're talking early 90s, maybe midnight, could have been mid 90s. Visiting evangelist from America comes to preach at the WAC back in the days when it was the old WAC building. And, he brings with him extra people who are all doing this stuff. And the night before, we're given all of the charts that we need to be ready to play with this. And we do some run throughs and everything. And then on the day that he's preaching, he he gets to a point in his sermon where he just stops. Now he goes, now the woman, the singer, female singer that he brought with him on the tour. She doesn't know I'm going to ask her to do this, but the Spirit has just told me we need to hear her sing this song. Like, nobody knows this is going to happen. That's what's going to happen. I'm at the piano pointing to the chart going, well, I knew, like, because we rehearsed it last night.
Yes.
Like, Spirit's running a bit late on the update because we all knew. I even know what key she wants to sing it in. Like, do people really sitting in the congregation think that
100%.
I'm magically picking the correct key
Yeah.
out of 12 to suit her voice?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? I mean, just the nonsense that musicians get to see on the bass. Like, you just see the lies, like just blatant lying that goes on.
Musicians
like,
see behind the curtain.
Oh, it's like, let alone the fact that I know that the stuff that I play during the offering will make a difference to how much gets collected.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, if you play a particular kind of piece of music,
Oh, yeah.
no one's going to want to give any money. Like,
Yeah.
you can torch that offering like that.
Yeah.
So, you know, just the whole idea that it's, I mean, just,
Hillsong
I needed to share that.
Hillsong made a ministry out of that.
Oh, well, I mean, and their theology, of course, is that, you know, the money that you make proves that God loves you. So, you know.
Can I ask this question? So as musicians, we've seen behind the scenes. In many ways, nothing really surprises us. You see this recent women's ordination post, all the men in the picture. I too saw business as usual, but was like, guys, when are you going to realize this decade of false hope being offered? It's not going to change. Nothing's changed.
No.
But so in many ways, you and I could say, well, look, that's not a hill we'd die on. Can you imagine, and I'll just flip it a little bit, imagine if one of the leaders in that photo said publicly, look, women's ordination isn't a hill I'm willing to die on. What would you think about them saying that? Because you're kind of saying that in a way.
I think they would be honest. I think that saying, look, I can't, look.
I think you're right.
I have said this kind of thing. Okay, I'm going to do another anecdote. Once upon a time, I had to tell somebody they couldn't speak at a conference that was being organized because the conference was being funded by the church, and this person had recently come out and said really extraordinary, you know, things about the church that the church wasn't happy about, to the point where I had a phone call from the GC president to say, deal with it. I was in my early 20s, right? So I call the guy who we've got to say, you can't speak. And I say, look, here's the deal. The thing's being funded by the church. We want to continue providing a ministry with the church. Like, we're not interested in not engaging. Like, the whole point is that we engage with the church. That's the point. Having you come along jeopardizes all of that. And so therefore, we cannot have you speak. And, you know, his response was, but, you know, that's censorship. And I said, yes, it is. That's 100%. Like, yeah. And the reasons are that it will jeopardize everything that we do if we have you come along. And it's unfair to you that you were asked when maybe you shouldn't have been asked in the first place. And it's unfair to you that you were expecting you were going to speak 2 weeks from now, and now we're canceling. I'm really, really sorry. It's been a screw up. Like, we did the wrong thing. And you're unfortunately carrying the cost of that because you're now experiencing disappointment and loss of opportunity and everything. And unfortunately, that's just the way the cookie crumbles this time. And he came away going, thank you for being honest. No one's ever honestly told me that's why, whatever. And it's like, you know what, just take responsibility. If you are a leader of the church and you know women's ordination isn't going to be a thing, the thing that would be the most inspiring option to take would be to go, guys, it's wrong. Like, I don't think it's the right thing, but it's not going to change. And it would be deceptive of me to stand here and make out that it's going to change when I know in my heart it's never going to be a thing. This isn't the place. If you want to be, if you're a woman who would like a leadership role in a religious community, this isn't the place for you. We can't help you here. You can't serve us here. This is
Yeah.
not the place for you. And this
Yeah.
brings us to the fact that I really think that the experience a lot of people have with the Adventist church is one of being in an abusive relationship. You know, you're you're told that you can participate, but then you can't. It's kind of that whole gaslighting thing of like, we want you, but we don't. And,
Yeah.
like really putting it in terms of a romantic relationship, like, yeah, but I don't like you dressed that way. You've got to change how you look. Oh, my friends won't, you know, just all of those kind of controlling, I'll only love you if you're like this. That and ladies and gentlemen listening, if you are in a relationship where you're being told, I'll only love you if you're like this,
Yeah.
just have a think about that. And also have a think about, if you've been raised in Adventism, how do your personal relationships maybe mirror that kind of conditional, abusive, emotional situation? But what would be just so refreshing and honest is for a leader to say, if that's your goal, if that's your ministry, if that's what you feel God has called you to do, you can't do that here. And I'm
Yeah.
sorry, it's not right, but it's what it is. And if you want to pursue that ministry that God, that you feel God has called you to do, let me help you find another avenue for that
Yeah.
calling, because this
Yeah.
is not it. This isn't it. That would be amazing. That would be,
Yeah.
I don't think that'll ever happen either, but that would be amazing, because then there would just be transparency
Yeah.
and you could
And
actually
they'd get
trust that
respect.
person.
They'd get respect for that.
Yeah, yeah. But like, just the nonsense of, oh, one day it's going to happen. It's never going to happen. It's
Yeah.
not a thing. It's not a thing.
Yeah. I in the last 2 weeks, I've had many leaders contact me, and I've had some really good conversations. And even Terry Johnson has reached out to me. I'm hoping he'll get on the program. We're going to have lunch in a couple of weeks.
Mm,
Gilbert Kanji and I had lunch together the other day, and they've been talking about a lot of things that are positive in the pipeline, which we'll chat about later.
mm,
But I, one of the themes coming through is, and this is not the last two people I mentioned. This is other leaders have said to me, we're waiting to see if Ted Wilson gets back in again or not. And I think that's a little bit disingenuous, because that's just hedging your bets. Because if he does get in,
yeah.
they'll possibly continue a little bit of holding back. If he doesn't get in, they'll suddenly be a little bit more open.
Uh,
But
I don't. Mm, I
but
think
I
it's
get
actually
what
smart. I'm
but
more pragmatic. I'm
what
more pragmatic.
I guess what I would like to hear, though, is what you were just saying, that hey, we um, intellectually or personally support women's ordination, but we're part of a church that doesn't, and so we
Yeah.
can't move in that direction right now. That's the kind of honesty I'd like to hear from people.
No, no. The right now is deceptive and dishonest. Like, as in, what does that mean? Does that mean this week? Does that mean next year? Does that mean
Them
10 years?
saying
Does
not
that,
right now. Them
yeah,
saying not
like,
right now.
what does right now mean?
Mm,
What does right
mm,
now mean? Like,
yeah,
if you're good, you'll get a lolly later. Well, when later?
yeah,
When later? Is it going to be after dinner, or is it going to be, after I turn 21? Or are you going to give it to me when I retire? When am I getting the
yeah.
lolly?
But
Don't
but
think
what
so.
but what you're
No,
saying then is that annoys you, but you're also
no.
saying that that
I'm not
that
saying it annoys me. I'm saying it's dishonest.
yeah, okay.
I'm
Yeah.
saying it's manipulative. Like,
Yeah.
imagine if you said to a child,
Mm.
not now, you'll get it later.
Mm.
I don't know. Say they want a tricycle and you go, not now, later. And then the years roll by. And then finally, when they're, I don't know, 67, you go, I'm on my deathbed. Here's your trike. I
Yeah.
mean, that's not it. That's
Uh,
wrong. That's
af
wrong.
After, the no vote, I had a very interesting back and forth conversation online with behind the scenes again, with someone that worked high up at the actual GC. And
Yeah,
they said, "Look, we've seen some of your posts, and I want to say something to you in private. You're welcome to pass the information on, but don't say my name."
yeah.
And they said, looking at the maths of this, it's unlikely to change for 20 years. It's
Yeah.
not even on the next the next agenda for the next
Yep.
GC, which is coming up in a couple of months,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
not. So that
Yeah.
was the 5 years gone, and so
Yeah.
he's predicting another 15 that
Now
might
that's
see some
honest.
change.
That
Yeah,
see that I can get on board with that. Going, you know what, guys, just be realistic here. Look at the
yeah,
numbers. It's not happening for 20 years. Who knows
yeah,
where we're going to be in 20 years, but it's not happening for 20 years.
yeah,
So, whatever strategy you're going to involve in, like whatever decisions you need to make about your life, about your community, your connection, all of that, you need to be honest about the fact it's not happening in the next 20 years.
yeah,
So, you know, just just be pragmatic and honest. And I
yeah,
think the politics of the church are something that people genuinely think that the Spirit is leading these decisions. They
yeah,
genuinely think that the Holy Spirit is coming along and going, oh, we're going to put this minister here or there.
yeah,
No, just the same way as the Holy Spirit didn't tell the woman to sing the song that we rehearsed the night before, the Holy Spirit is not
yeah,
in charge of the agenda at the general conference. It's
mm,
people. It is, and people lobby. People get this. People who engage in the whole narrative of it's the Spirit that leads us. They're the ones who actually are doing the hard politicking to
yeah,
make things fall their way. And
yeah,
when we actually understand that it is an institution that works the same way every other institution works, you've got people who argue a case and other people who argue a case, and only one of them is going to win. And the winner is then seen as the right thing. Like, that's the right thing,
yeah,
whoever won the argument. And it could have been either one. It doesn't, there's nothing preordained about it.
mm,
It's
mm.
literally who was convincing in the political context to get it through. Uh,
And
Anyway,
by being pragmatic, you can then go,
yeah.
okay, because I think people do have this false concept that soon means within the next 2 or 3 years. Someone's just asked a question which I'll put up, which I thought's a good one. We've talked about numbers and we're saying 20 years. This person has asked, do you personally think this will never be a thing within the Adventist Church?
Well, look, I can't predict beyond my lifetime. Like I can't say like 300 years from now it's not going to be a thing. So, never is, infinity. But I will be just astonished beyond all astonishment if I die at the same time that there are women ordained in the Adventist Church. It just, for so many sociological reasons, for so many organizational reasons, for so many theological reasons, I just don't see how all of those little pieces are going to cohere
Mm.
into a policy that says women can be ordained in the same way as men. There's just too many bits that don't join. The jigsaw will not come together.
Yeah.
That's
I,
in
I
my
think
lifetime.
I think it could happen only if quite radical boycott
Oh,
kind of scenarios came into play.
oh,
And like you say, realistically, that's not going to happen.
it's not going to happen. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, yeah, sure, there could be XYZ in the world. Like, I once had somebody, say, "Oh, I'm worried about your commitment to this project because what if Andrew Lloyd Webber contacted you and said, 'I want you to write a musical. I'll fly you to New York.'"
Mm.
Like,
Mm.
so my commitment to this project isn't like, that's not a realistic what if. Okay, and I
Yeah.
think this is the same kind of thing. Like, yeah, sure, there could be all kinds of completely crazy things happen. And let's face it, in the 2020s, a lot of crazy stuff is going down.
Mm.
So, don't put it past, you know, the
Mm.
universe to have all of these kind of seismic shifts. But all things being equal, no, I don't see it happening. And I think once you know the rules of the game, that's when you can play. If you don't know the rules of the game, you you can't play. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
just the fact that the rules of the game are just being obfuscated, like, just be honest about it.
Yeah.
This is literally what this religion is. It's a religion that says women can't have spiritual leadership roles the
Yeah.
same way that men can. That's what it is.
That's right.
That's the offer.
Yeah. And that's why I personally left, because I was literally holding Renee age 2, watching the No Vote on YouTube, and I thought, right,
And
I've
just,
just had an
yeah,
epiphany. This
it's
is not going to
wrong.
change in my lifetime. It's not
Yep.
going to change in their lifetime. I'm not
Yep.
going to put them in a position where they will grow up having 40 more years of false hope.
Oh, yeah. No,
So I was
100%.
gone. That's just me personally. I don't suggest
Yeah.
that
No,
for
no.
others.
But I'm with you 100% on that view and that emotional,
Yeah.
recognition that no, it's not changing.
So, yeah. And yeah, literally won't happen in my lifetime.
Mm.
And I doubt theirs as well. Someone's challenging this, and it kind of dips in a little bit. And I'd love to read out some names, but for some reason my monitor's not working properly. And when it comes up on the program I've got here, it just says Facebook user.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think before my monitor had problems, it was from Levi, but he's responding to this notion that the Bible is pretty clear that women should have this kind of position in the church that is less elevated than men, and he has written, it's time to disregard the Bible. No, there's
Mm.
never a time to disregard the
No,
clear word of God. I'd love you to talk
look,
about that.
he's 100% right. We should not disregard the clear word of God or the Bible. The challenge we've got is that the clear word of God allows us to take differing positions on this issue. So the challenge isn't that we should disregard the Bible, because, yeah, fantastic. Let's use the Bible as the place that we get it from. But then we're going to end up with competing views, competing arguments, both
Mm,
from the Bible. The
mm,
question is, how do you resolve the competing views that the Bible presents you with? That's a challenge that
mm,
people can't overcome. Humans
mm,
can't overcome. And then you're left with this idea of, well, we'll let the Spirit decide. But the Spirit doesn't decide. The Spirit waits to see what you rehearse on Friday night, and then it decides that
mm.
that's what you're going to sing on Saturday.
Yeah,
So,
very
you know,
manipulative.
people are
Yeah.
the ones who make these decisions, and they get different arguments from. I mean, I understand that when people say, "Oh, we're going to disregard the Bible and let women be ordained," that's because you are reading the Bible to support your view that women shouldn't be. Other people read the Bible and find things that say women should be. So how are you going to resolve that? That's the question. How are you going to resolve the tensions that you find in the Bible? And I hand that back over to our Facebook user.
The the seems and Levi, if you're watching, I'd love you to reply to that. There seems to be, in my humble opinion, two churches in one. Yes, there's many churches inside Adventism. There's many groups of people. There's many thoughts. There's people who hold politically conservative views and might be, with their actions, might be more liberal, etc., and the opposite, vice versa. But there appears to be those who want to elevate Ellen White, prophet, have some strict pillars that can be seen in the teachings of Doug Batchelor and on 3ABN. There's that kind of Adventism, as opposed to a more progressive Adventism that's
Yeah,
a bit more
yeah,
open-minded. And
yeah.
I'd suggest that there's one Adventism that's very clear and defined by Ted Wilson at the very top of, this is what Adventism is, this is how we want it to be. And then the other group is a little bit more inclusive, and therefore they are the ones that have a wider spectrum of what is an Adventist is.
Mm.
I can't see those two ever working it out together. They're chalk and
No,
cheese, oil and water. What advice would you give, if you agree with me,
yeah.
that people can do to kind of just stop hobbling each other? There's this endless decade after decade, right back to Wagner and Jones in 1888,
Mm.
where each side just keeps, in many ways, holding each other's uh, ability to move forward at a faster speed. What can they do? Like, what could be done? Separate conferences?
What, okay.
If you're not going to leave, I mean.
Yeah, no, yeah. Um, what you're talking about is authoritarianism versus non-authoritarianism. And the answer is, you can't negotiate with that. Like, they're diametrically opposed ways of existing as a human in the world. Like, it's like saying, how can the vegetarians and the meat eaters find consensus in the sense of on what they're going to eat for dinner? It's like, well, if everybody's being served meat, the only consensus there is that the meat eaters have to eat vegetarian, because that's the way that works, right? Like, if everyone's eating the same meal, you've all got to go vegetarian. If you've got vegetarians and meat eaters and you want everybody to have stuff they can eat, that's the only option, because you cannot serve meat to the vegetarians, because that's what it is.
Yeah.
That kind of analogy isn't perfect, but it kind of gives a sense of the impossibility of kind of going, oh, well, I'll give a little and you give a little. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work
No.
that way at all. And so at the end of the day, the only choice is, do I want to participate with authoritarianism? Do I want to participate with that? And I know that that's not what you were trying to ask me, but there isn't, the choice you're putting to me, it doesn't exist. This isn't a both sides, like, oh, there's good people on both sides. That's not what this is. This is a point of view that is authoritarian versus a point of view that is not.
Yeah.
That they don't negotiate with each other. This doesn't. It's either or.
Yeah, which kind of deepens the issue in some ways, because
Yeah. Oh,
at least other, like, people say to me, oh, well, all movements and all organizations and everyone faces these issues. Yes, I agree. But Adventism, Mormonism, JWs, certain bodies and systems just
yeah.
find it a little bit more difficult, demonstrably so, than other movements.
Well, it's because, look, some institutions are dedicated to continued relevancy, continued connection, continued. What's a good example? There are businesses that have had whatever is their first product become completely irrelevant, and they entirely reinvent themselves using the technology that they already had. And they come out with something that's a completely different product than they started with, because the first product just no longer met people's needs. And they flourish because they're capable of looking at their communities and going, how can I serve your needs in the current context? Now, religion doesn't have that same flexibility, because the whole authority of the religion is generally built on a sense of timelessness. And, like, it doesn't matter what your context is, it doesn't matter what your perceived needs are, this is what we offer you. Like, we offer you this, and if you don't like what we're offering you, you've got a problem. You've got the problem when you don't like what we've got. And that's a sign that and the fact that you've got a problem shows how much of a problem you've got. Because if you didn't have such a problem, you would want what we have to offer. So it's just, it's a stupid cycle of manipulative, like, it's sociopathic. It's saying what you need, what you feel you need, is the wrong thing. Start feeling like you need something different, because it's only when you feel you need something different that you'll realize how good I am to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what it is. And, if you're an institution that says, I know I have what you need, you just don't know it yet,
Yeah.
take a good hard look at yourself, because that's just, you're a sociopath. That's,
Yeah.
harsh words, but when you've sat through the sermons that talk about all these people with all of these sins and problems and all the rest of it, and it's when they hit rock bottom they finally realize that they need Adventism, and they need, that this is going to be a thing. It's like, all those people who are living functional lives, they're too functional for Adventism, is the essence of that sermon, right? Like, you're too functional for us. Get dysfunctional so you realize how much you need us.
Yeah.
I just.
And then when you come into the church, you're often relegated to the back seat once you've become an officially signed up tithe-paying member.
Yeah.
There's a lot of effort put into bringing people in, but and I'm just generalizing here, there's less effort on
Oh, that's a
addressing.
whole different.
Yeah, that's
That's a whole
another
different
interview.
conversation. Yeah.
My wording has come back on here, and Athel Dobson has written, good questions, Peter. Thank you, Athel. Is it a salvation issue? Should be the part answer to our corporate management issues? What are your thoughts on that comment? Thanks, Athel.
Well, okay. Well, then this is actually a great comment because, yeah, I mean, what the church is selling, like if you're going to go into marketing kind of terms, what the church is selling is salvation. And the question that I often used to ask people when they were struggling with their relationship with the church and with, you know, theological matters was, what is it you feel you need saving from? And usually, in fact, I can say no one's ever answered that question. Like whenever I've asked somebody, what are you being saved from? There's never an answer. People don't know what they need salvation for. You'll end up with people saying, so I can have eternal life. It's like, okay, if you want to have an eternal, infinite existence, okay, but beyond that, so I would say let's ask ourselves, what are we wanting to be saved from? Not what are we wanting to be saved from? Like, what is the thing that's not working for us that we want salvation from? When you know what that thing is, then you can address that question. But salvation is just a concept where we don't actually know what we're being saved from. You can't have that conversation. It needs to be rooted in some kind of reality.
Yeah, I like that too. I like your pragmatic approach. We'll wrap it up in a minute, but because I'm trying to take people's advice and have shorter conversations that are dramatic and to the point.
Well, I think we've been dramatic.
And so if anyone does want to ask a question, now's your time to throw it up on the screen. There possibly would have been a time for you when maybe if you'd seen that picture posted, having been
Oh yeah.
younger, seeing this, but having seen it for decades, where you may have been angry and seen it as a hill to die on.
Yeah. That was when I was 15. When I was 15, like
Yeah.
I can tell you 1980, 16, 17, like maybe as late as 1985.
And what happened that triggered that at the time?
What, to feel angry?
Yeah.
It's
What
just
kind
like
of
it's not
things were
right.
happening? Right. Yeah.
I mean,
Like
it's just not right.
yeah,
It's just
yeah,
not
yeah.
like
Discrimination
like
based on gender is simply not right. Yeah.
well, and it's not, yeah, and it's also just kind of pathetic. Like, really, that's the best you can do? But I mean,
Yeah.
but that's how I would have thought as a 15, 16, 17-year-old. Like, what? Whereas these days it's like, yeah, that's actually a really true photo. That's a really accurate representation of how it works. That's what it is. Like, being angry at reality is kind of a waste of, emotion. Like, is it how it should be? Okay. Like, but it's literally what it is. It's literally what it is. And, bless.
It's interesting. Like I mentioned, Black Sabbath, Deep Purple, Status Quo, you're kind of rock bands, but
Yeah.
but if you look at my music input into the church, it was mellow worship music,
Yep.
country music, bush dances, and in many
Yeah.
ways, I feel like a heavy rock lead guitarist that was forced to play in a country music band. And eventually you think, oh, I just can't pull out the licks I want to, but I'll just
Yeah.
play with the band and the vibe I've joined. So you've almost got to realize what it is you've signed up for. And we were
Yeah.
born into it, so we didn't sign up
Yeah.
for it.
That's right.
If I was
That's right.
25 and came across Adventism, I would not have signed up for it.
No.
And I say that with love and honesty, and that's just how I feel. But you either go along with what you've signed up for, you leave, or you just try and perhaps be pragmatic and just go, okay, that's what you guys are up to. Carry on.
Well, yeah, look, for a while in my life, I was like, I want to be a part of my own community. I don't want to have to be a refugee from Adventism. Like, I don't want to have to migrate somewhere else. Like, this is this is my cultural home. I want to find a way for there to be a space for me in this community too. And the moment arrived where I realized I couldn't actually live an authentic life if I was showing up to church every Saturday. I was being given messages that, you know, I I couldn't be authentic. So, I hear your thing about you can't play your authentic licks. Like, it's just heartbreaking.
Mm,
Like, of course we all have to do things we don't like.
mm,
It's not that. It's like, no, if you've got that inside you,
mm,
in a good world, we celebrate the who that you are. We
mm,
celebrate the spark of life that you have been given.
mm,
If the whole philosophy is that God made you, if we're buying into that idea that God made you,
mm,
why in the world would we try and tell you that you're wrong? Why in
mm.
the world would we say, but don't be you? God
I
made you,
know.
but don't be you.
Don't be
It's
yourself.
like,
Yeah.
what in the world? And I really think that the whole, the whole idea of integrity and authenticity is that's the hill to die on. Like,
Yeah.
how do we have integrity and authenticity in our
Yeah.
relationship with this culture, in our relationship with the religion, in our relationship with um, the doctrinal positions that it represents? How do we authentically engage with all of that? How do we have integrity when we engage with that? And for me, certainly taking a pragmatic approach and just going, let's just call it what it is, that
Mm,
gives me space to have integrity. You know,
mm,
not pretending it's going to be, you know, magically changing next week, because
mm,
that
mm.
that kind of thing.
Yeah. I think becoming your own person, however you can do that in whatever situation you're in, is fantastic. I know I let go some pretty good opportunities to be lead guitarist in some of these other kinds of bands in the early 80s that went on to be actually quite successful bands, and I turned down those opportunities. And one
Yeah,
musical, actually, I got offered a job to be in a quite a well-known musical
yeah,
in the 90s, and I turned that down as well. And I dedicated my life to Adventism and didn't leave till I was 55.
yeah,
Um, but I do go to sleep every night without regret. I wake up
yeah.
every morning, and one of the first thoughts I have as I wake up and as I go to sleep is go, "Whoa, I'm my own person. Finally, I'm my own person."
Oh,
And
that's actually going to bring me to tears, Peter. Like, because it's a beautiful thing for now, but it speaks to quite a lot of pain as well
yeah,
in
mm.
the past. Yeah,
I just encourage people to somehow, staying in the church, whatever you do, find a way to be your own person. Really.
yeah, yeah.
I want to
I
just
agree.
give a quick plug for a lot of great work that Gillian Ford has done and Milton Hook on my, I think it's my left, yeah, um, is the book. Sorry to do a little plug just towards the end of the interview, but
That's good.
I think it's important. This is the Milton Hook book, reformist theologian, gospel revivalist Desmond Ford. Gillian has done hours of work on this, and they just arrived on my doorstep
Oh, looks
to be able to
great.
make available for people. Totally refreshed, and also on my right, she's done hundreds of hours of work on Des's book on Daniel, and re-released that as well. And I just wanted to let people know, because it's just that what a team they
Yeah,
were, and Gillian continues to be, for being their own people in an incredibly difficult time period at Glacier View and throughout their whole lives. And both of them remain as gracious as ever. Um, so I just want to give both of those releases a big plug. So, in closing, if you were to have in front of you all the women that expressed anger and the men who expressed anger regarding that picture,
Mm.
what advice would you give to them? I know that's putting you on the spot a bit, but
Well, I'm actually just going to question the premise of the question, in the sense that I think a lot of the people who are expressing anger, frustration, whatever, I don't necessarily know that it was a kind of personal affront. It was just a impatience. I didn't read it as anger. I read it as impatience and eye rolling. Just like, really, really,
mm,
really. There's no, and I don't have advice. Look, I've got to say, I don't have advice for that would be applicable across the board for anybody, other than to acknowledge that we're all trying to make sense of life. We're all trying to make sense of our world. We're all trying to make sense of our experiences, and that involves a lot of feelings all the time.
mm,
And the right thing to do is different for everybody, and it might be, well, I mean, I'm not saying that everybody has a completely different right thing to do,
mm,
but just,
mm.
you can't say this is the right thing to do. Ironically, that is what a religion does, try and tell you, like, this is the right
Yeah,
thing to do.
so,
But
yeah.
the truth of the matter is that what you've got going on in terms of your meaning making in your life right now today, um, that's what counts. Like that's what really matters. Like, are you connected to your community? How does this connect you or disconnect you from your community? And what are the things that actually bring peace and joy to your life? Because at the end of the day, if things aren't bringing you peace and joy, um, in some level, fighting for a just cause can bring you peace. I don't mean to say that fighting for something is opposed to what I'm saying. It brings me peace to know I am, making positive change in the world. That brings me peace. So,
Mm,
it's a matter of going, does fighting for this cause make my world better? Or does fighting for this cause make my world worse? And choose things that make your life better.
mm,
That's
mm,
that's my only advice. Choose things that make your life better.
That's great advice. And I think in light of the compliance document, and if Ted Wilson gets in that ratcheting up more power
Mm,
or gaining more teeth,
yeah.
I think there possibly will come a time when it will affect
Oh,
grassroots members a lot more than it is even now. I
yeah.
think our shared concept of it being pathetic, um, but being resigned to it in a way, is that we've seen it endlessly going on, and we perhaps
Yeah. Look,
don't.
I just want to say, I want to say, I know we're wrapping the interview up and everything, but I really do want to hammer home. It's like, this is not like a resigned to it. This is a recognizing it for what it is, not being resigned to it, just
Yeah,
recognizing
that's
it for what it
sorry.
is,
That's true. Yes,
you
good
know,
point. I'm glad you
and
clarified that.
and because it's like, you don't have to accept it. Like,
Yeah,
recognizing something for what it
yeah,
is
yeah,
doesn't mean you accept it. It just means you recognize it for what it is, and
yeah.
you use that as the basis for your decision making.
Mhm.
And you don't have to choose to be resigned. You can choose to be anything. You've got the whole spectrum available to you, but you
Yeah,
do have to recognize it for what it is before you can before it's actually going to make a difference, whatever you do next.
that is a very good point, and I think that explains why I'm noticing women way more angry about this picture than the no vote, because I
Yeah.
think in that, what, 5-year
Yes.
period or whatever,
Yes.
or actually 7 years now because of the delays with lockdown to the next voting, so that's
Yeah.
7 years now. They are now seeing it for what it really is, and therefore there's more anger, more indignant. So it'll be
And look, we've
very
had the whole
interesting to
me
see what happens next.
yeah, and then we've had the whole Me Too movement. And then, like, I mean, what a timely thing at the moment. Like, the Brian Houston thing with all of the,
Yeah.
impropriety, covering up of child sex crimes. I mean, we haven't even begun to touch upon the ways in which the church has facilitated the cover up of, you know, terrible behavior, sometimes criminal behavior. Like, there is a whole other thing there, and that's very much connected to not having women in leadership. Like, that's part of the price that you pay when you don't have women in leadership. I mean, it's a whole big thing, but recognizing it for what it is the first step.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't mean to now launch into another hour of us discussing all
No,
of the things we could discuss next, but that's
I think that's a really great takeaway line, to recognize what it is, recognize it for what it is,
yeah,
and act accordingly to ensure that your life can be meaningful and have
yeah,
purpose, either
yeah,
within those parameters or within the
yeah.
parameters you choose for your life. Yeah.
However you choose to do it,
Choose it.
however,
Yeah.
like, whatever
Yes.
it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Elissa. It's been so good chatting with you. I was looking forward to this conversation. I'd like to encourage those of you that are watching to click that subscribe button. If you're on YouTube and on Facebook, the like button. It literally takes that much time and helps
Yes.
the algorithms for the program. It lets these important interviews spread far and wide, and I would really appreciate that. And also, if you're interested in supporting what I do, I'd appreciate. It's like I said to someone recently, Elissa, you'll understand this. I feel like I'm busking on the street, but instead of
Oh,
singing with an open guitar case, I'm saying, if you're enjoying my content, here's my here's my guitar case here.
yeah. I mean, you and I are generations, like, you kind of feel like you've moved backward in the economic spectrum with
I
this
know.
whole
Oh
PayPal dinner.
yeah,
Yeah. Anyway, I hear you. I hear you.
yeah. Lockdown affected us not too positively, I can say.
Hmm.
Thank you very much, and
My absolute pleasure.
let's do this again soon.
Be fun. Be fun.